Um, Before we launch into the panel, the Ag Sector program is fairly new to the Federation, and so it was launched in November of 2019. It's funded through the Sector Council program, and we have a 3-year funding agreement with the Department of Labor and Advanced Education. I came on November of 2019 to get things rolling. The Ag Sector program is this on? The Ag Sector program, we support the farms through with access to tools and resources to ensure a sustainable workforce. That's kind of what we're all about, is your farm labor. We focus on the needs of employers as farm businesses and the workers as well. We try to attract and retain a sustainable workforce and promote agriculture as a rewarding career. What we do, we deliver HR supports. We try to navigate through the programs and the legislation. We're trying to strengthen the workforce through education and training and career promotion. We're fostering a culture of diversity and inclusion within the workforce. We're promoting innovation to an innovative approach to workforce challenges. And obviously, as we're here today, we're supporting succession planning, transition planning. How we do that, we deliver training and workshops. We have a few things that are ongoing right now. If you have not seen, we've recently launched workplace education programs. There's sessions starting in January, and they are filling up quickly. They are at no cost to you and virtual, so there's no travel time this year. So I'd encourage you, if there's anything you're interested in, to check those out. We'll also be unveiling very soon is Skills Pass, which is an online learning marketplace that are short courses that you can do. It's all self-directed learning, and we'll be unveiling that very soon. And of course, all of these things are on our website right now, and we will be launching our new website along with the Young Farmers website, as Rebecca had mentioned. We also try to update you through the NSFA communications, the e-news and news and views and social media. We're promoting agriculture careers and working with stakeholders and industry partners like Terry today. So that's what that all looks like. And we're engaging with you like we are right now. So here we are tonight supporting Nova Scotia young farmers in their mission to grow the next generation of industry leaders to ensure a sustainable future for Nova Scotia agriculture. Today's young farmers are our future, and if you plan to pass your farm on to the next generation, a business plan or a succession plan can help set them up for success. And that will give you confidence that your farm's legacy will be protected. Succession planning is not just for families, as you're going to hear from one of our panelists tonight. In the promotion material that we shared, there were some stats, like it is expected in the next 10 years, $50 billion in Canadian farm assets will be transferred to the next generation or out of the industry. And that's a lot of money. A 2019 survey indicated that only 16% of farms actually have a written plan outlining how their transition will take place. Transition is a journey and it can take years, but we need to start somewhere. So to help get those conversations started, that's why we're here right now. And we have FCC's Agriculture Transition Specialist, Terry Jones, and we have 3 farms willing to share their stories, their experience to help you out. Terry Jones is the Agriculture Transition Specialist with Farm Credit Canada, working in the Atlantic provinces. Terry has enjoyed a diverse career with FCC, working throughout Eastern Canada since 1987, after he graduated from Dalhousie University. He and his wife are enjoying being back in Sussex, New Brunswick, after working in Ottawa for the past 7 years. Over the years, Terry has had the opportunity to work directly with agriculture producers and food processors. Much of his time was focused on the financing needs of business. Now he is working with farm families, guiding them in planning their farm ownership transition and management succession. So Terry, it's all yours.
Thanks, Heather. I want to thank the young farmers tonight for the opportunity to be able to talk to you about transition. It's something that I'm certainly passionate about. And I think at this time, I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we're doing here. And hopefully you've got it. If not, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll jump right into this. So farm transition is something that's near and dear to my heart because, as Heather said, I spent most of my time talking about financing and helping farms succeed from a viability point of view. But often you go out and you'd meet with families and you just see that they just were not connecting. So when FCC started this process, it was like, hey, sign me up. This is something I really want to get into. So tonight I'm lucky enough to be joined by 3 producers that have different stories to tell as they're in different stages of their lives. And I think before we move into the panel discussion, I'm going to give you probably a 10-minute quick overview of what FCC is doing, and also some of the tips and tricks, I'll say, with regards to getting your own succession plan starting. So I started with the idea of a quote, actually stole a quote from Holstein Canada Young Leaders that says, "I've got my foot in the door, now what?" And that's where a lot of people are. They're not sure where they're at. So in 2018, FCC actually went out and started a pilot project in Saskatchewan with 2 agricultural transition specialists to see if we could put a fit in place for a service to get people started. And it really worked well. The demand was overwhelming. And at this stage, we have 7, and we're going to have 9 ATSs working across the country. And I cover Atlantic Canada, although I have to admit, it seems like I cover the office walls in my basement because I haven't been out of the office much since COVID has come in, but hopefully I'll get back on the road. So as Heather was mentioning, some of the stats that the industry is facing and our challenges, how do we bring value to this? And, you know, unfortunately, 50% of Canadian adults don't have a valid or up-to-date will, and that's a risk by itself. When you combine that with 75% of Canadian farms are going to change hands over the next 10 years, and less than 10% have a written transition plan. When you combine these, that is a huge risk factor. So when we talk about providing pre-transition services, we want to really help people find out how to get started. Our process is to talk to people, get them involved. The terminology we use is the senior generation and the junior generation. A lot of parents will consider that quite discriminating and saying that they're seniors, but it has nothing to do with age. It's really your place. We'll have separate conversations to determine how far apart or how close they are with regards to having common goals for the farm operation and a transition of the management and ownership responsibilities. We really believe in the value of this service, and so much so that we're not even charging for it. And it's not just for FCC customers, it's for all Canadian producers. So anyways, let's get on with the discussion. Let's talk transition. So why is transition planning so difficult? And a lot of it really comes down to the fear of the unknown. What's it going to cost? I'm so busy just running my business, I'm not sure if I've got the time. My kids don't appear to be ready, or they haven't told me yet what they want to do. I'm not ready to retire, and why do they want to push me out? Have I saved enough to retire? How much do I need to retire? There's a lot of questions that go on. Unfortunately, this list really is endless with regards to the fears and concerns that people have. And then when you factor in that you're working with your family, it's tough. Try talking about these issues with your family. It gets even tougher. And what I always find is interesting is we put on maybe a facade or an image when we go to the office or we go out in public, and we try to be professional and civil in the way that we act, the way we talk, and what we do. When we come home, we throw off all of those safety nets, and we just kind of relax, let our guard down, and sometimes we just let it fly. And unfortunately, the people around us, the people we care for the most, are the ones that inherit that kind of freedom. And it's not always the way that we want to do it. So when you're running a family business and being part of a family, it is a real puzzle. And it's tough when our family is also our place of business. So when you talk about unspoken expectations, it is a silent killer. Unless we find a way to openly communicate within our families, we're doomed. And I have to laugh because I used to do lots of projects with my dad. And too many times, without me even asking, he'd look at me and say, "You left your hammer on the bench over there." Sometimes, if he wasn't watching, I'd have to ask. But most of the time, I was too proud to ask, and I just spend my time aimlessly walking around the shop trying to figure out where I left my tools. And that is what happens when we don't have clear communication within our family. We expect our partners to read our minds. And when we do, we need a lot of good luck, because it's a tough challenge to do when you're using unspoken expectations. So my ask is really to schedule regular conversations. Take time to talk and plan together. When we do this, well, I say we already do it already. And a lot of it is, we talk about cropping plans, cattle to cull, work schedules. We're doing that. But let's take the time to talk about our longer term goals of what we really want for our farm and our family. Because unfortunately, miscommunication happens. Sometimes when we're talking, we're not listening. We're not fully understanding. Our minds are thinking about something else, what we have to do. The phone might have buzzed and you're distracted. The people doing the talking may have skipped over key steps, but if no one's listening, no one's really going to understand what the plan is. So perception is reality. And that is the world that we live in. Walking away from an ineffective discussion allows us to come up with our own version, our own facts of that conversation and the plan. And when too many versions are on the table, that's just going to lead to future conflict. So what's next? Where do we go from here? We have to begin the discussion on your farm transition. Well, how do we do it? We do it by starting today. There's no time like the present. So let's do an assessment. Do an assessment of your operation. Do you have role clarity? Do you know who does what and who's responsible for what? Is there training required? And good luck with this one, because you can really hurt people's feelings when you say you don't know what you're doing, or let me help you understand what I'm doing. A lot of the way we say it makes a big difference. But we need to find out who needs to learn more so that they're ready for the future. If you look at the senior generation, do they have a retirement budget? Well, do they have retirement savings? A lot of times our farms are pumping all their profits back into the operation. And if you spend 30, 40 years working on the farm and putting it all back in so the farm's more viable, when it's time to walk away, do you have anything set aside? Well, if you don't, then it's got to come from somewhere. And do they even know how much they need? Do you know what your cost of living is? We spend our time doing business and we don't always take our time counting to see what we've done with the money that we have. And communicate with a purpose. Well, I'm really passionate about family communication. So if we're going to have family discussions, we need to keep them focused, on track, and I suggest only one topic at a time to avoid overload. So let's start by making a plan that's right for you. So every farm operation and family is different. You got to come up with a plan that's right and unique for your family. So my ask is that your meetings are regular and structured. Have an agenda, take minutes. Take advantage of the winter months when you got some more time. So take the first Tuesday of every month and say 9:30 to 12 o'clock. This is when we're going to meet, and we're in a position that we can actually focus on one item at a time. We all know how busy our summer schedules are. So in the summertime, maybe you're just going to have a refresher meeting at breakfast once a month or something like that. But now is the time to do it and take advantage of the change in your work schedule in order to make this a priority for you. Because there are risks to your family business. And we all know the risks of farming when you talk about weather and growing crops and raising animals and all that kind of stuff. But there's also risk to your family. What about a breakup, an illness, a death? These factors certainly don't help. And then when you bring in the business risks of things like there could be loss of assets through a fire, there's increased asset levels, which are always nice, but unfortunately there's increase in debt levels. What factor does that have? What about the availability of land? They're not making any more of it, you know, and unfortunately we have tight margins. I don't think that one's ever going to go away. So these factors all show why having a business plan and a transition plan is so vital to your operation. If this wasn't enough, we got some more obstacles that we really should be looking at. And it's interesting because we had the slide earlier, perception is reality. These obstacles are only as big as you want them to be. Fair versus equal. That's an easy statement to make if you're the one receiving the farm. But what about the non-farming children? This situation, like everyone, can be different depending on the values of the family, the number of people involved. And I always say, talking about it now is much better than talking about it when the will is being read. Fiscal reality. What are the economics of the farm business? Can it support two families until such a time that the senior generation is ready to retire? Can it afford to pay for their retirement? This is where the junior generation really has to do their homework and build a business plan. It's much easier to do your financing on a pre-approved basis opposed to being done at the last minute. And you want to get credibility with your lender? Talk about what you're planning to do and present your business plan. That goes a long ways to really showing your lender your skill set, your dedication, and your commitment to making this thing work. As opposed to this is what I'm trying to do, it's due next week, and I don't know all the details. Yeah. Those first impressions are lasting. And what can I say about communication? It should always be number one. Without an open, honest communication done in a proper manner, life is always going to be so difficult. Well, if those are the obstacles, let's talk about the opportunities. I always say, focus on the positive, glass half full. This goes a long ways to helping everybody's stress level go down. And when it goes down, people are more likely to be able to work together. Be realistic about the farm finances. Maybe this should be the primary focus before you talk transition. After all, if the farm is drowning in debt or having a hard time paying its bills, this isn't going to need to be addressed. But who wants to take over an operation, you know, I won't say that's bankrupt, but is not able to pay its bills? You got to focus on being able to survive in this world with tight margins. Will the farm need to expand or find other sources of revenue to support the transition plan? There's got to be alternatives that you look at. And then what happens if things don't go according to plan? Do you have a contingency plan? Discuss alternative options and always be open and transparent. Because our objective here is to have a clear path to ownership, not just to live on a promise that says someday this will be yours, but the knowledge of there is a means to the end and you know exactly where you are in that whole path. That's what you're looking for. So why wait till the will is read? Now, these are a couple busy slides and I'm not going to talk long on them, but I will say, knowing that this session is recorded, it's nice to go back and look at some of this stuff. The moral is waiting till the will is read is way too risky because life is going to happen between now and then. You think of the 5 Ds that are always out there: divorce, disposition or disposal of the assets. And this one is interesting. It's really meant for the parents in the way that you set up a transaction. Because if you give the next generation all of the equity without the right safeguards, the kids, I hate using the word kids, the junior generation can come in and say, you know what, this is more than I expected. I don't want to do it. I'm cashing out. Or they might not be able to manage it and they lose it well, the senior generation can lose all of their equity if not set up properly. So divorce, disposition, debt, well, yeah, we all know what the challenges are with too much debt. What happens if somebody dies? The primary provider, the key person that's working on the farm, responsible for a lot of things, or maybe the successor, and dementia. And unfortunately, yeah, that's one that nobody wants to experience, but it's far too common. These are all great reasons to have a plan and have some contingencies. When we think about transition, everybody thinks about tax planning and estate planning. There's so much more. And if you look at it, this list is tremendously long. You got tax and business structure planning, sole proprietorship, partnerships, corporations. There can be family trusts. Are in your will. Are you using life insurance as a means for supporting the non-farming kids? Have you done your investment planning? Goal setting. Goal setting that the family agrees on is so important. Who's making the decisions? Who's making the decisions now and in the future? And how will we get between the two in transitioning between that? Communication in the family goes a long ways. And of course, role clarity. Who's responsible for what? And do we know exactly the way things are going to get done or agreed on it? How about management transition? Because not only are we trying to transition ownership, but we got to transition the management of the farm. And if I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm going to hand it off, well, I got to make sure that that's a smooth transition and that the ball does not get dropped and that the farm's going to suffer. And if that means training needs to get done, we get a training plan in place sooner now than later. Again, how do we deal with the non-farming children? And are there people or ways to deal with situations when we cannot agree and there's conflict? I always say, utilize your professional advisors. The work that we do in trying to get people started and pointed in the right direction does not replace the professional advisors. It is really meant so that you can walk into your advisor and say, I have a plan, we have a family consensus, this is what we want to do. And then your advisor is going to help you with those steps. And if they have clear instructions of what you're trying to do, you're going to get a clear answer of whether it works or not, or what the consequences are going to be. And that's going to save you a lot of money as opposed to, we'd really like to buy the farm or sell the farm. And what do you advise? Those general questions get general answers and chews up a lot of your time. So to help you be as available as possible for going in and having those knowledgeable conversations, FCC has set up a number of different sources of information. Whether you're talking to someone like me, your ag transition specialist, whether it's one of our virtual events, webinars, or whether it's information we put on our website, or even our YouTube videos that we put in place, there's meant to be lots of information out there to kind of give you the resources that you really need. So with that, I really want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to talk to you. And I'm excited now to be able to move into the conversation with our panelists. So I said earlier, we've got 3 great panelists. And the first one that's going to talk to us, you've already heard from, Nicole Van Dyke. Nicole's grandparents immigrated to Canada in 1954, settling in Caledonia, Nova Scotia. They started their farming operation by purchasing wild blueberry land and then have continually diversified the farm business by starting a fresh pack line and then moving on from there to building a juice plant. So in working through this growth and change over to the second generation, the family now involves 2 companies that are owned by Nicole's dad, her uncles, and her aunts. So there's also a third company that makes it a little bit more confusing because it includes these same family members and some non-farming family members as well that are all shareholders. So Nicole is in the process of finding her place in the business, and she's done so by introducing a beekeeping division to the wild blueberry production company. Nicole has a BSc in ag business with a minor in animal science from Dalhousie University. She's looking to increase her role in the family business and is at the introductory stage of her transition planning. So Nicole, I'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion. So I don't see you on the screen, but if you can get up and running, I'd love to hear the rest of your story, because I just touched on it, but I know you've got more to tell us.
Oh, can you hear me? It shows that my camera is on.
I hear you and see you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as introduced, my name is Nicole Van Dyke. I am the middle child of Kim and Peter Van Dyke, who both also attended the AC. So I have two brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother. We both grew up, or we all grew up, sorry, working on the family farm, weekends and summer months, alongside a dad. And as the years passed, both brothers decided to choose different career paths. So my older brother is a mechanical engineer and my younger brother is a ticketed welder. Both of them, they're not around on the farm near as much as they used to be. But when we need help, they come during the busy months, come back and help us. So as mentioned, I stayed on the agriculture path of study and graduated from Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture in 2018. So I wanted to keep my my studies wide view, because I knew I wanted to be involved in agriculture, but at the time when I chose to go to AC, I wasn't really sure where I would fit if I came back to the farm. So I minored in animal science just to keep my options open, I guess. But luckily, over the next 2 years of attending AC, our family businesses and farm, they both expanded. So that gave me the opportunity to find my place once I graduated and moved back home. So one of my main reasons or inspirations for staying and working in the agriculture industry would be my grandfather and my father. They both show or have shown lots of passion and drive for our own family businesses as well as the industries my whole life. They're not only heavily involved in our farming operations, but the industry boards and councils as well. And I tagged along to those as much as I could when I was available. So in 2015, my father and I started to keep honeybees. And since moving home, I have taken over the responsibility of keeping those honeybees for the pollination of our wild blueberry crop, as well as the honey production side of things. And right now we're up to about 200 honeybee hives with the hopes of expanding to 500 in the near future or more if possible. And then in 2017, we had an addition built on to our existing juice plant, which we now dry 100% pure wild blueberries. So I spend a lot of my time in that production plant, whether we're in production and I'm on the floor with the other employees, or I'm in my own little room in the packing room, getting orders ready to ship out. We currently ship all across the world with our dried products as well as our juice products. So I've also taken some extra added food safety courses that allow me to be certified in dealing with our paperwork for traceability, our cleaning records, and the proper cleaning of all of our equipment, and safe food handling of everything that comes in and out of the plant. So that's kind of with work, but with the transition side of things, as Terry mentioned, I am quite early on in that. As just graduating in 2018, I wanted to come home and work for a good few years on the farm and find my place between the different businesses. What my biggest interest would be between those few businesses and what I had to offer to those businesses before having the conversations and writing anything in stone and signing off on it. to make sure there wasn't any decisions that I wanted to back out of or somebody was hesitant in making. Because our family is so large and all the companies have a different combination of my father and his siblings. So yeah, we're quite early on in those stages. We've definitely had conversations of my interests, and that over the next few years, I'd like to take on more management and leadership roles within the businesses. But yeah, my father is still young and very active with little to no plans of slowing down in the next few years, which is good for me because currently my fiance and I have a little one on the way and she's due in February. So I'll be off for a while on maternity leave. And then I also have a little side venture of my own that got put on the back burner when I went off to university. So I designed a wild blueberry horse and dog treat with the byproduct from our juice line, which is a blueberry pomace. So back then, before university, I did some research and production of the treat, and it looked very promising, but when I hit university, it got put on the back burner. So that's something else that over the next 2 years, I'd like to revisit as well. So with all that being said, with taking on my responsibilities from the farm and taking over some of my father's responsibilities, I need to do so in a respectable, reasonable manner for my family and the farm as well. So yeah, we're still quite early on, but conversations have been had. Nothing's written in stone or signed off on, like I said before, but conversations have definitely been had between my father, uncle, and aunt and I. So
That's really great. And I'll echo the comments that are in the chat line that say congratulations.
oh, thank you.
So it's interesting. You started by talking about your two brothers. I know the role of women in agriculture is improving all the time. We've come a long ways over the last number of years. What about in your family? Because with your dad and grandfather as real inspirational people, have they felt the same way with regards to enthusiasm with you coming in? Like, have you got any pushback?
I actually have to say that I personally and professionally have never ever had any pushback of my place in the agriculture field. If anything, my father and grandfather like to shine a little extra light on me being involved, which sometimes I don't like, but no, they definitely, and my uncles as well being involved, they like to brag and such. I mean, my grandfather and father always really liked they never liked the division. If my brother ran a piece of equipment because he was older or whatever, when I became old enough or they felt I was responsible enough to run that piece of equipment, they showed me how to run that piece of equipment. There was never ever any division on our farm with responsibilities because I was a female versus male. So I've been very, very lucky in that aspect.
That's great to hear. I want to come back to what you were saying about the conversations you've had with your father in trying to clarify your interests and all that kind of stuff. In going forward, if he's planning on being around for a number of few years and enjoying what he's doing, what about triggers in your mind with regards to, are there any either magic dates or events that you're going to take advantage of that would be the stimulus to say, okay, let's have another conversation because we've been talking about all this goodwill, but when's it time to turn some of it into action? Have you thought about that?
We've actually had conversations even leading up to this panel about dates, and we both kind of laughed and we say, you know, there's not really a date. It's kind of all the companies are expanding every year and there's new exciting things going on. So it's hard to set those dates, especially with me now having a little one on the way. But we had said that probably we have set a goal of 5 years. We'd like to have something written on paper and signed off of all of our intentions.
Well, that's good to hear, because when folks come in and they say, hey, we're doing a plan, we'd like to have it finished by the end of next year, I almost want to say good luck.
Yeah.
But because there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And I think we do have to visit on a regular basis. Thanks, Nicole. I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of your story as time goes by. And yeah, good luck in February.
Thank you.
So I want to move our conversation to our second panelist, Ken Carrier. Ken comes to us from outside of the agriculture industry or outside of the idea of being primary production. He's been a business executive for more than 30 years and has recently turned his attentions to farming. He's the sole owner of Eurus Williams Sons Limited and a partner in La Fleur de Pommet. My French is not good, as you can tell from the great dialect. He's acquired Eurus Williams in 2016 and La Fleur de Pommet in 2017. And these two operations grow approximately 75 acres of apples and pears in southeastern New Brunswick. So Ken is a grad from St. Mary's University with a Bachelor of Commerce and from the Richard Ivey School of Business Senior Management Program. He's worked in senior management positions with both our big players, Cavendish Farms and McCain Foods. Currently, Ken is the chair of the Apple Growers in New Brunswick. And Ken, I'm really glad to have you with us. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of your story, because I understand you've had a big change in going from the corporate world into the agriculture world. Can you kind of fill us in on your story?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be able to share my story. So as you've indicated, I've been in the corporate world for most of my career, the better part of 30 years, the majority of that with McCain. And I'll start off by asking a question in that, has anybody, on the call here, on the Zoom call today, that they're in a job that they're comfortable with, earning a good living, but you're still longing for something different. You're just not 100% happy. Well, probably you're not alone in those feelings, because for about 10 years, that's the way that I felt. So I was very comfortable in my role with both McCain and with Cavendish Farms. In senior roles, but I was longing for something different. Then in 2012, I had an opportunity to move back to New Brunswick from Montreal. And I grew up locally here in Shediac, New Brunswick. So for me, this was a good move to be able to come home. And almost immediately, I began looking to acquire my own business. I have to admit that it wasn't in my plan to acquire necessarily a farming business, but I had set specific parameters that I wanted to try and achieve. The first thing for me was to try and stay in the food business, because that's what I knew and that's what I was comfortable with. So that was one parameter. The other things that I looked for was something that had a healthy halo, and that I could feel good about owning and managing. And so I began the process of looking for a business. You've been talking a lot about family transitions. Well, this is a little different because my family did not own any farming businesses. So I reached out to the contacts that I had. I had quite a few contacts in the agricultural business because of both McCain and Cavendish being in the potato business, obviously. But I actually found the first business online. And I contacted the business broker that was responsible for selling the business, and we had a quick discussion, talked about it. He sent me a package, so you go through the whole thing of signing confidentiality agreements, so on and so forth. Sent me the information, and the price they were asking for, I just couldn't make it work. So I actually had pushed that aside. Was still working full time at the time, so I was doing this in the evening and on weekends. And then lo and behold, probably about a month later, the business broker called me back, and we began negotiating a little more on the price. So, you know, for me, one of my strengths is that I'm able to analyze financials and so on and so forth. So I was able to I knew what I could pay for the business. So that's when, you know, we began really negotiating, and I had secured my financing through traditional banking, and 2 weeks prior to the closing, that actually fell through. So I ended up, I had simultaneously and luckily had been talking with FCC. So we actually ended up, we were able to close on the closing date, and I got my financing through FCC. And that was done in April 2016. So that was how I kind of found the first business, which is probably not a traditional way of finding an agricultural business. Then for La Fleur du Pommier, once I was involved in the apple industry, I made the choice. So I had left my position with Cavendish at this point, and I had made the decision to try and get involved in as much industry activity as I could. So as you said, I'm actually the past chair of the Apple board now. There's another chair, but I got involved in the apple growers in New Brunswick. I went to every training and session that they had in the industry, both in Atlantic Canada and in Nova Scotia. I also traveled quite a bit with IFTA. We went to Washington. I've been to New Zealand, so on and so forth. So another piece of advice I would give is try and get off the farm as much as you can, and go see what others are doing. Because what ended up happening was I met two younger individuals that were trying to acquire the farm just south of where Udis Williams and Son was. And the owners didn't quite know how to pull the trigger on the divestiture, and my current partners weren't quite sure how to go about evaluating the value of the farm and making an offer and so on and so forth. So we got to talking, and I approached them with a proposal that I would negotiate or broker the deal for the acquisition for equal partnership. So we're 3 people, and we each own a third of that. So that's how the second orchard was acquired. So, 2 really different ways of buying those businesses. The other thing you've asked me about is to talk a little bit about the differences between how how I manage those 2 businesses, one being 100% owned by myself, the other one in a partnership. I guess what I would say to that is that there's pros and cons to each of those. From owning 100% of the business, you're 100% responsible. Some of the pros of that are when you have, really good years, you get 100% of the benefit. Decisions are somewhat easier because you don't have to vote on decisions, although I check in with my wife, obviously, and things like that. But but I'd say some of the cons of being 100% owner is it's a little bit of a lonely endeavor. You're by yourself. You sometimes can feel a little bit alone in your decisions. So, and with my past being in a corporate environment, there was always teams, there was always a team aspect. So I kind of miss that. So La Fleur du Pommier being in partnership, I felt that what that brought me was a little bit more of a social aspect to the business. And also, I also felt that I have certain strengths, but my two partners have different strengths. Like I'm more of a marketing and finance person, where one of the partners is he's an engineer, and the other guy is really good with maintenance and equipment and things like that. So we balanced each other out, and I felt that that would work well for us in those partnerships. So far so good. I mean, one was in 2016, one is in 2017. I'd say the last 3 years have been anything but normal, as everybody in the agricultural section knows. But I guess the only regret I would have in having talked about all this is that that I didn't make this move sooner, to be honest with you, because I've enjoyed it, and if you're thinking about it and have the means to do it, I would recommend doing it sooner than later.
Those are great words. So let me reflect on your experience a little bit, because I'm sure there's people out there that are listening that are not going to take over the family farm, and they're probably wanting to farm, and they're going to have to go outside and either find a farm operation to essentially buy into over time, or even buy outright. So if you had any words of wisdom for those people that were beginning their search, are there certain people that they should be working with, or things they should be doing in order to make that effort as successful as possible? Like what?
Yeah, I've been fortunate in, I'd say a couple things. The first thing would be to find mentors that you can lean on, because I knew a little bit about potatoes, but I knew nothing about apples. I've been at this for 5 years. I still have a ton to learn, but almost immediately upon acquiring my first apple business, I tried to and have gotten close with someone who I consider probably one of the better growers in the province here, with Bellevaux Orchards. So with Robert and Sam, I work closely with them, and we almost trade expertise. So I help them with business aspects and strategy, and they help me with different things from an agricultural aspect. So an example of that is I just planted my first new orchard this June. It's the first time I've planted an orchard. So they were with me every step of the way and helped me out. And just like I helped them out with, I don't know if I helped them with analyzing, what new pack line they should consider, and what savings could be had by making those improvements. So that's one thing, having mentors within the business that you can lean on. The second thing is, I said it earlier, is getting off the farm and seeing best practices. And the third thing, and you mentioned it earlier, is your financing people, to try and stay as close with them and being as upfront and honest with them as you can be, because with the frost, what happened in 2018, I truly believe if I was with a traditional bank, I don't know how I would have kind of gotten through that. But with FCC, I mean, they contacted me almost immediately. I feel like I'm giving a plug for FCC. That's not what I'm trying to do here at all. But there was flexibility there, so I feel really comfortable working with someone who understands what we're going through, and that is willing to be flexible with you. So yeah.
So I'm going to keep moving the discussion on. I loved your comments. The one that stuck out to me the most was when you first approached the broker looking to make an offer, the asking price just didn't work. But when they came back with a new number, you had crunched the numbers, you knew your margins, and you were in a position that you could put it together. Having that expertise is a luxury that most of us don't have, but it really speaks to the idea of having the support team, the mentors behind you before you take a step like this.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to get some questions at the end. So I want to move to our final panelist, Jim Boyd. And as we've talked to Nicole with regards to getting started, Jim has gone through this process and has survived to be to a point where he can reflect back on what's gone on. So Jim and his wife Jennifer are the owners of Boydsdale Farms in Midland, New Brunswick. And Jim has completed his farm technology diploma at NSAC in '95. He came home to join the dairy farm at that time. But since the farm was not large enough to support two families, he really had to go out and work off farm for a period of 10 years. And it wasn't until then that he and Jennifer were in a position that they could actually acquire the farm from his parents. So his journey's had a few surprises, and I'm glad he's persevered through all this. And that I'm glad, Jim, that you agreed to join us tonight. So welcome. And can you tell us about your journey?
Thanks, Terry. I graduated, as you said, in '95 from AC. I completed the farm technology program, bringing home a business proposal to my parents from the college. And as I've completed in my third year, and how the farm could sustain and grow to accommodate my plans and move forward. In '95, our farm only had 18.6 kgs of quota, so it's obvious that expansion was needed. But the plan also involved taking on some sizable amount of debt. And that's where discussion is sometimes a roadblock. And as you mentioned in your talks prior, discussions really need to happen from the smallest things right through to the whole stages of each stage that you work through, as far as that I can see. So I realized some of the hurdles that they realized, because my parents weren't, how can you say it, as open to taking on the debt at their age. And that's what they focused on, was what the debt was. So, and so we had to refocus, and we had to regroup here and take a look at how this was going to work. So I went off farm to work while helping on the farm as much as I possibly could, under the understanding that what I put into the farm would go into growth of the farm to make it viable for me to come back. So in 2005, I had worked out in 2 different sectors, plus I helped with some neighboring farms in the area on the offside. But by 2005, the farm had grown to 23.6 kilograms. And after 10 years, I was getting mentally and physically exhausted. And it just came to the place that something had to change. My wife, Jennifer, and I acquired, at that point in time, my father and I formed a company, between my wife and I taking the common shares, my parents taking the preferred shares. The preferred shares were to be paid out over time, meaning that the purchase and the financing basically was my parents, but over a period of years. From this point on, we actually grew quota, and I'm pleased to say, and this is not a plug, but it was my involvement with Farm Credit, and it was actually Terry Jones that came and had a few hard conversations, and we had to again do some refocusing at that point to say, you know, are we going to make this work, or am I going to say goodbye to the farm forever? And I had, at that point in time, I had to make some really focused decisions. So we went to purchasing quota, we began to growing and taking on debt. And my philosophy of moving forward, and as of today, the farm's sitting at 81 kilograms of quota. In 2019, we built a new robotic barn, and if you have seen any releases, we put the first V300 de Lavelle into Atlantic Canada, and I'm pleased to just to handle the increase of cattle and the production, and it's working out really well. Big difference in life. I have a son and a daughter, both interested in careers in the agriculture sector. As far as where that will end up, you know, a few years will tell. I have a daughter in university. She's determined to be a vet. My son is determined to farm, but and if I can at all, I would like to make this able to be arranged. And I guess using my experiences, I'm hoping that as we move forward, we can, I can use my experiences to have discussions and move forward with them to be what they want, as well as I reach that age to slow down, to understand in discussions of where they are and where I'm at. And I think Terry summed it up the best. It's discussions that need to be had, but they're the hardest discussions to have. And as a fellow mentor that I've relied on in the farm sector, he says, you need to find something with the sibling. You need to remember that it's a business, but you need to find a way that you can communicate. And 90% of those conversations you do not want to have on your day-to-day business. For example, my father and I love to hunt. The fall is our time of year. A lot of our discussions happened in the fall while we were hunting. We'd take and go for a walk and sit down, have conversations. So if you do it while you're working, you're both trying to focus on the farm. You're both trying to focus. And if you can have those conversations, and then you can both strategize as to, all right, this is where you would like to go. This is where I'm coming from. But if you don't, and if you picture it as, if you look at it, and I had to, Terry actually helped me out with this, because if you're looking at it, that you're trying to take something from the former generation, how willing are they to give up what they've worked for? But at the same time, you're trying to put it ahead, but they're trying to hand off something they've worked all their life into, and they don't want to bury you. So it's that common ground that needs to be established. Thanks.
That's a great story. It's funny because I had a bunch of questions for you, and I will say I'm feeling uncomfortable with all these plugs, but thank you for them anyways. And just for official record, I don't have anything to do with lending money. That's the nice thing about the separation in our role. But I had a couple of questions for you, and I'm going to skip some of them. I'm going to come down in my list, and I'm going to say, life has not always been simple for you. It hasn't gone completely as planned. Getting from 23 kgs to 81 kgs, that's when it started turning for you. But I guess my question goes back to, was there a light bulb moment, or was there a time when you recognized that the efficiencies of the farm and your labor was not going back into the growth of the operation? And what got you on track, I guess? What did you need in order to get you going to be successful? Does that make any sense? I'm rambling, but
No, that's not a ramble, Terry. It's the point that I had to accept that if I was gonna farm, I needed to be here full time. I needed to realize that, yeah, I was making a living off the farm, but was I really doing it for the farm or was I doing it completely for my family?
Mhm.
And it's that fine line between family and business that I've had to walk, that you need to maintain the family, but you need to put the business forward. So working off the farm and trying to farm, I was really putting my family behind, and the farm was not moving ahead very fast
Mhm.
because my energy was going into, basically I had to come to the place where my energies was going into another business. So if I was going to be in business for myself, then I had to put my energy into the business and take the risk. Now, I will say that even after I come home, I did work out part-time, anywhere as I can.
Well, I'm really glad that you stuck with it, because obviously you had a dream, you had a vision, and you made it work to get to where you are today. So we've used up most of our time allotment. Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate your story and sharing with us. And there is a Q&A session that's coming up, and I think Heather's going to moderate that. But I guess at this stage, I'll say for any of our panelists or myself, if you have had questions about what we talked about in the last hour, feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, folks. There's been some really hard questions asked here, and you know, we certainly appreciate you sharing your vulnerability in all of this, and it's some good experience. We do have a couple of questions for the dairy farmer. Were there particular problems associated with your parents taking preferred shares and you taking the common shares? And were they comfortable taking care of the preferred share option?
That's a not a trick question, but it's not an easy question. Because it's a simple fact that when we formed the company, they had to realize the investment from there forward went into the common shares instead of the preferred shares. So their equity was basically, at that point in time, I'm just going to simplify it and call it, their equity was then frozen. Mm-hmm. And their equity was not paid for up front because I didn't have that kind of cash. So it took time for them to receive, and to be quite frank with you, I'm not done paying at this point. I'm still paying. So it takes years. And if you really look at it as, but it's the easiest way that I can say that you can roll a farm operation over without debting the farm to the point in the family situation that's not allowing the farm to move forward. Because first of all, it's a business. Second of all, you have to have a life. They have to have one too.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. If there are any other questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A or the chat at the bottom of your screen, or if you'd like to verbally ask a question, if you raise your hand again at in the bubbles at the bottom, we can unmute you if you would like to speak. Paul, you can unmute yourself there.
Great. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Thanks for the presentation panel. Just for full disclosure, I'm coming to kind of check out the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture after having moved here from Nova Scotia and being happily involved with the National Farmers Union, or sorry, from Ontario, and enjoying the panels and the AGM so far. I guess I'm curious, coming from Ontario as a new and young farmer and not having access to intergenerational wealth and debt, as was pointed out, and not being able to access the Farm Credit Canada loans because they were asking for a minimum of 25% down payment, even for youth. I'm wondering how the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture is assisting new young farmers, especially Black and Indigenous folks who have been dispossessed of land, and wealth? How are you assisting new and young farmers from accessing farmland?
Do you have somebody you'd like specifically to ask that question to, Paul? 'Cause I
Anyone who would like to contribute?
Am I off mute? Yeah, that's a great question, Paul, and we certainly appreciate that. That's probably best directed to our president or some staff, and we can certainly take that offline and get back to you on that. We're doing what we can, so we're trying to direct our questions tonight to panelists. So we will certainly take that online and get back to you on that. It's a great question. We appreciate it. Are there any other questions for the panelists or for Terry? Terry, you got some really great plugs there. So how do you do this free of charge? Like, how does FCC, I know that they do not actually have service fees for this, the transition expertise. So how do you do that at no cost?
Luckily, FCC's had a desire to take a percentage of the profits that we make to be able to put them back in the industry, whether it is farm safety, health and wellness, education, those types of things. So it is just about what we're directing our excess funds to. And in this case, we're giving back to the industry, as in trying to meet a need that's out there or fill a gap that needs to be filled. So yeah, it doesn't cost anyone any more interest than what they're paying right now, because we have to be competitive on that one with all of our other competitors.
Perfect. Okay, are there any other questions? All right, well, if not, we are going to wrap things up. We've gone a little bit over time, but we certainly appreciate your time. And to the panelists, thank you so much for sharing your time and your stories. We do appreciate this. As I said, you've been vulnerable, and that's, you know, we give you credit for that. Terry, thank you so much for your time. If this were a real meeting, we would have some lovely gifts for you from Nova Scotia. But in lieu of shipping those things out, we are making a donation to Feed Nova Scotia, which is our provincial food bank, as a thank you for your time. So that's what we're doing. The winner of our door prize was John Vanderreet, a dairy farmer in Nova Scotia. So John, in addition to the toque and the hoodie, we are also giving you these two resources. They are some books that we have on hand. There's 2 copies of this wrapped up, and so like one's for the incoming generation and one's for the outgoing. So you can each keep a copy on your table. So if anyone is interested in these books, it's Farming In-Laws Factor and the Do the Tough Things Right. So if anyone is interested in those, we can hook you up. But John's getting them free. So if anyone has not registered for the NSFA annual meeting, that starts tomorrow morning at 9:30. You can still register online, but you do need to register to get the Zoom link. So feel free to do that. Just go to the NSFA homepage, and that's very clear. There will be, again, a short evaluation popping up on your screen. If you could provide some feedback, we'd appreciate that. And otherwise, thank you again so much, Terry and Ken and Jim and Nicole. Thank you so much for your time, and all of you who participated and listened tonight. The link will be circulated with the recording. So if you didn't catch it all, or for anyone that missed it. So thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.